Thank you very much. I mean, it's a good. We should not have web pages and TVs to be distributed around, and I hope you won't be too disappointed. I'm not going to talk about my own work, or not too much, so that's for tomorrow. And mostly today I'm going to talk about everyone else's work. But before that, okay, I can speak without a microphone maybe. I'd like to thank the French Embassy, which thoroughly contributed to my coming here, and of course the university here, and especially Ran and his wife for letting us entertain local culture. And if I'm a bit tired today, it's mostly because of this woman here who's carrying this bottle, and we actually had, I think, 3 bottles for 4 people last night. So I'm slightly tired, and this is not entirely my fault. So why is evolutionary biology useful? Oh, I should not get close to this, right? So I would like to cover this, I think, the reason why biology is useful. It's either because we have to manage species, like threatened species, or pest species we want to get rid of, or species that we manage to make rare because of our action. And so I'd like to go through, give study cases as example to convince you that yes, evolution is important. And then towards the end of my talk, and I've been working a bit here and here, but not on this at all. And to the end of my talk, I would like to move to social sciences like evolutionary psychology, that work people are doing at the Institute in Montpellier and elsewhere, and as well as evolutionary medicine. And I think it's really, I guess the main message I have is that it's really time to take into account evolutionary biology in all these disciplines, including medicine. And this has been told now for 10, 15 years, and it's still not coming into medicine. And I think we should pay attention more to evolution. So one thing that appeared last year is this new journal, Evolutionary Applications. And I think it's meaningful that this journal finally appeared. It's 17 years after this journal appeared, which was the application of ecology. So it took 17 years for evolutionary biologists to actually accept to sell their discipline to more applied work, and to say, yes, we do have something to say for the name and for applications. And there are probably various reasons why we waited so long to dare to say that what we are doing as evolutionary biologists is actually useful for the society. One of them maybe is because of Nazi, that use science, and that use Darwin, selection, that people are a bit reluctant to actually say that genetics might be useful. I think they are afraid of being instrumentalized. But maybe they were just lazy, I don't know. And first I would like to, I know you probably know what is Darwin and what is evolutionary biology, but to me, evolutionary biology is really 2 ways of thinking. One is what John Maynard Smith called selection thinking, and the other one is we are trying to predict the past. When I say predict the past, it means we're trying to reconstruct the past doing phylogeny, but more and more we try to reconstruct it in a way that we can actually test different scenarios. And over the last 10, 20 years, we've had more and more tools to actually really make testable prediction about how we think things happened in the past. There has been lots of progress. And if I just, this is actually Timbergen, who was one of the earlier ethologists, behavioral ecologists, said there was 2 ways of asking questions. And the proximate question is like, how does a mechanism work? And the evolutionary question, like the selection thinking I was talking about, is really asking the question, why has this mechanism given a selective advantage? So it's really used for the adaptation. And the other question is what's the ontogeny of the mechanism, the development, and the evolutionary way is what is the phylogeny of this mechanism. So there is really 2 ways of, it's not that one way is better than another one. They should be complementary. But traditionally, in evolution we are here. And I think it's time to combine the 2 approaches, and I think that's the best way to go. Now, how fast does evolution proceed? I mean, most people, you might think, okay, evolution is so slow, why bother? Because it's too slow for a humans live life. And in fact, it can be shown that evolution proceeds faster and more efficiently in species with short generation time and larger population size. But as the environment is changing quickly, extinction might precede adaptive evolution. And so maybe in some, very often we can't care about evolution because other factors are acting faster. But if I just look at the various species, it's true that humans are long-lived animals, and trees as well they are long-lived, but other long-lived animals, they evolve very slowly because we have a very long generation time. And so we might indeed go extinct before we can adapt to a new environment that we're changing ourselves. So we have to understand how to affect the environment in a way that we won't go extinct before we can adapt to it. And similarly for other organisms. The endangered species very often also have long generation time. They have also small population size, which is not the case of human population. And so there is a problem also that they might go extinct before they have time to adapt. Conversely, other species such as wheat crops or plants which are bred, or animals, arthropod pests and microorganisms, and many of them are pathogens, evolve fast or very, very fast. And here I think it's really important that we understand how they evolve in order to be able to fight against them. So I'll just give an example of work that we've been doing. The very beginning of my talk, I'll explain what we're doing in my lab very quickly, and then I'll turn to more interesting stuff that other people are doing. So as an example of fast evolution, I'd just like to briefly mention spider mites. Spider mites is this beast here. You can't see it with your eye. This is through a binocular. It's a herbivorous. It eats plants. It's a worldwide pest. It can go on 1,000 different species of plants, so it's a major pest. But it has a very short generation time, like 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks. So it's a very convenient species to do adaptive evolution and to ask questions. First, can adaptation go very fast? And can you make adaptation to anything? And so what we did on this species was to start from a base population, which has been maintained for 9 years, I think, on cucumber, and ask the question, okay, can it shift to a new host? Like if we get rid of the cucumber and put either tomato or pepper instead, and we have replicate lines on this, how fast does it adapt to this new host? And the idea was that being for so long on cucumber, it should have lost the adaptation, the possibility to make a host shift. And in fact, this is just the result that you have the survival on tomato, survival on pepper. This is the initial line on cucumber. We had a control on cucumber in the same conditions. And you can see that after 15 generations, so that's pretty short, the survival rate goes from 0.2 to almost 0.6. So a threefold increase in survival rate on tomato, less strong adaptive response on pepper, but this is a very fast response for something that you might think would have lost the original genetic variation. So this is just to illustrate the power of natural selection to induce a host shift. And so I think if you hear that adaptation is a slow process, I think this is wrong. This is wrong for this kind of organisms. And so I'd like to turn to the first part, which is to illustrate how we can use evolutionary biology for pest management. And we can use it in very different conditions for biological control. I think it's when you introduce, this is very much used in Australia or the United States, where there have been alien species introduced. And so one way to cope with this pest is to use other organisms. And here it's very important, of course, to understand whether, because you have an arm race starting between the pest and the newly introduced biocontrol agents, and it's very important to predict what's going to happen. Even more importantly, I think, is genetic control. We see more and more of this, of studies aimed at actually manipulating the pest to introduce new genes like sterility genes that are going to decrease the population size of the pest. And I think there are not enough studies here to understand what's going on with these new genes being introduced in this pest. And I think we should not let these tools only in the head of molecular biologists, just like transient, like GMOs. I think it's very important that evolutionary biologists and ecologists actually say what's going on there. For the moment, it's mostly molecular biologists who are dealing with this. And I just would like to give an example of the usefulness of this evolutionary biology in pesticide resistance. This is work which was done in Montpellier. There is an overdose, as you know, of pesticides which are used for crop protection in agricultural environment. We don't always have the possibility of using biocontrol agents. We have the same problem with antibiotics. And this is, for instance, the increase of the number of species resistant to insecticide in mosquito species. As you can since the 450s, and it was new molecules coming in, but even though we moved from DDT, I don't know the word, or DDT, to new pesticides, we still have this steadily increase in pesticide resistance. And it's very likely that sooner we'll have no molecules to produce. And so some people said, okay, why not try to understand what's going on with pesticide resistance, and instead of just having this arms race that we look for new pesticides, why not try to manage population in the way that they don't evolve resistance? And so this is work that was done in the south of France on this mosquito. And the idea is that there is a cost of resistance. Like every adaptation has a cost. Like if you want to resist a pesticide, you need to produce something that is very often costly to produce. And what has been shown is that there is also an evolution of the cost of resistance by what's called compensatory mutation. So even if it's very costly to start with, but then it might be replaced by other genes which are less costly. And we don't want this to happen. We want resistance to remain costly. And so this is, by the way, this is France. And Montpellier is here. Some people ask me where Montpellier was. Montpellier is here. It's on the Mediterranean. And so in this area, we had lots of mosquitoes. And of course, mosquitoes cost a lot because it prevents tourists to come. So it's being sprayed by insecticide. So the tourists, instead of getting mosquitoes, they get pesticides, but apparently they prefer. But the problem now is that all these mosquitoes are resistant to pesticide. And so people in Montpellier have asked, how can we prevent these resistant mosquitoes to establish there? And the thing is that you don't need to treat here, because here there's no mosquito, there's no water. So it's only near the sea, and this is also where the tourists are, anyway. And so if you look at the treated area in the 1995, there's a new allele from resistance which appeared. It was not present, and then it steadily increased. And in 2002, it was up to 20%. So the question was, how can we prevent it to go up to 100%? But people working on this found that there was a cost of resistance because the frequency of this mutation, which had appeared in 1995, was actually lower in the winter than it was in the summer. There was a cost of resistance which was expressed in the winter when the mosquito would hibernate in the caves. And by using a combination of knowledge of this cost of resistance and the dispersal distance of mosquitoes between the backcountry, the countryside, and the sea, they could model what would happen if instead of spreading mosquito on this area, where in this case, this is the frequency of the allele that we expect at equilibrium. Now we were at 20% in 2002. We're up now. So how can we decrease this resistance frequency to the point that we actually have no resistant mosquito at equilibrium? And it was just by decreasing the size, the treated size, you actually reach new equilibrium where the resistant allele cannot invade at all. The mutation is present, but it just doesn't. Because of the cost of resistance, it does not establish. So of course you might say, okay, but then you have twice less area which is treated, and so maybe you have twice more mosquitoes. But in fact, this is not the case. And because you don't let this allele invade, you don't let this compensatory mutation also evolve. So the cost of resistance remains high. And this is what we want. So this is just an illustration of how the knowledge of these studies on the cost of resistance, dispersal distance, can help you design in new management strategies. Now, the bad story is that this was done by Thomas Lenormand in Montpellier in 1999. He had an agreement with a local, which is called Entente pour la démoustication. So it's a local conservation which spreads pesticides, and they had agreed to actually decrease the area, but they never did it. So we don't know whether it was actually a good management strategy because it was not applied, and I think that's a pity. And of course, as I said, there are many other areas where I think evolutionary biology would be useful. I'm just looking at the time. Now, conservation biology is also a big issue where evolutionary biology is important. Of course, everything about conservation of genetic resources, everything which has something to do with genetic. GMOs, I talked about a bit. Alien species, climate change. We want to understand how our species is going to adapt to climate change. And again, you might think this is in a long time, but in fact, we do see changes already, at least in the distribution of species. And more people are concerned that we don't want just to conserve species, we also want to conserve their evolutionary potential, the potential to adapt to further major changes. Tomorrow I'll talk about this, and today I just would like to give you an example of the work that we are doing, which I think is a good research agenda for conserving particular species. I think we all agree that if you want to conserve biodiversity, it's mostly an economic problem, but it's also a social problems in the sense that we have to show people that it's important and to give them very focused example. And so I think what we should do, if we have any particular emblema, like people like to say that they are protecting some species around where they live, I think it's important to identify the cause of rarity. Are they intrinsic? Some species are rare just because they are always been rare, and man has nothing to do with this. If it's anthropogenic, of course, we should get rid of these threats. And we should see one way to deal with this, with conserving some species, is to do reintroduction. So if you see a species which is a population which is shrinking and you've identified the threat, first you need to get rid of the threat, but then you might say, okay, this population is really small and I want to increase its size. And the question arises is how to increase the size of local population. Should I use individual from the same population or individual from other population? And just to give you an example of why I like to work on this, this is in Corsica, that's an island in the Mediterranean, and we work on this plant. I don't see whether you should say it, but it's an endemic plant which lives on the rocks. So you need actually it's quite dangerous, but it's very nice. And so for the last 10 years we've been doing, and we were asked to work on this by people in Corsica. The reason is that it's a plant which is closely related to crops, brassica, and it's the only one among all the endemic plants in Corsica which is related to crop species. So we're asked to work on it as it could be a genetic resource as well. And so what we've been doing was to study 4 populations and do first environmental studies and demography, genetic, like microsatellite studies, to study a gene flow and mating system. We also did quantitative genetic studies to see whether there is local adaptation. And we came with really, conclusion was that in this population here, apart from goats, everything was fine. And it's a large population, lots of polymorphism, lots of evolutionary potential. This population here, you can see are smaller, and indeed they are less polymorphic, and they might have some problem, and we suggest they should be reinforced, but from individual from the same population. Whereas this population here is very small, and actually the environment is quite good. But the genetic studies confirm that indeed there was low evolutionary potential and lots of problem with mating. And so here we can say, okay, we should introduce individuals from other populations. Now the problem with this population, it's a particular flower color that you don't find elsewhere. And here comes in one problem that you have when you want to protect species, that you want to make mixing of population, but then by doing so you might either break up local adaptation, which would not be the case here, but you might also dilute some particular characteristics that people like. So here you can come into some conflict with local population, that they want to keep their white flowers and nothing else. So now turn to game and fishery management, and I'll go very quickly here. We have two things. Usually we try to fish big fishes, and we try to hunt only males, or big males. I'll just go too quickly here. What are the consequences of fishing? Where there is more and more evidence, this is a cod, I think, more and more evidence that the way you fish has different action upon the fish size. Like if you fish with a trawl, like here, it will actually fish larger fishes, or if you fish with a gill net, of course it depends on the size, it will be like more smaller fishes. And of course if you fish between this or this will have an effect of the size of the fish that you catch. And if you catch only big fishes, you can guess what's going to happen to the fishes. There will be selection for small fishes. And this has been observed. So we already have evidence that there has been evolution not only on size but also on age maturity and a whole suite of traits. And I think it's time that people start thinking about these things before they say, okay, we should use this or this because it's more efficient. They should also ask questions about what are going to be the consequences for the population we're fishing. And the good news is that there is a paper which has appeared which says it's reversible. So they've worked on this, I think in Sardinia, and they've been doing experimental evolution of size, and they showed that indeed they would have recovery by relaxing selection. It would come back to the previous size. The problem that it took 12 generations. And most species, this would be like 80 years. And in 80 years, the species have time to go extinct before they recover their original size. And furthermore, there's another recent paper which shows that this is perch and this is pike, which eats the perch. So both are fished, but also this. And they showed that they actually looked at the evolution of the pike, and they showed that the size of the pike was dependent on how much perch were fished. Like that, when there is overexploitation of perch, this pike would become bigger, presumably because there was cannibalism going on. Remember, this is a predator of this. So if you kill too many perches, it's going to affect predators. And so it's not only going to affect the fishes which are caught by fishing, it's going to affect the whole suite of other species which are interacting by those fishes. And so the consequence is that we know we have threats on fish stocks everywhere, but it's not just the number of fishes which decrease, it's also their size, their age of maturity, and a whole suite of traits that we should be concerned about. And that's evolving today. We can see it. And so regulation strategy should not just focus on how much fishes we should use, but also maybe on fish, on the net size, or some things like this. And of course, there are trade-offs between the protection of this environment and the fact that we want to let these species live their own life and have enough large resources and human nutrition and economic growth. And I mean, I'm not into that, but there are economists thinking about this in the moment. I'd like to turn to this side, consequences of hunting only males, what's called trophy hunting, where you catch only those males with big horns, like this, in big horn. I've seen, I mean, if you go on the website and you look at trophy hunting, you'll find, I don't know whether there are any hunters among the audience, but it's it's frightening what those people write. And I mean, the psychology of the hunter, it's a bit difficult to understand, I suppose. But anyway, these people have studied, they had a pedigree population, so using genetic tools they could derive who was the father, who was the mother. And so they had actually access to the genetic variation for horn size over a period of 10 years. And what they found was that this is the mean weight of the this genetic value, if you want, using these genetic tools of the mean weight of the animals and on the mean horn length. And you can see that in 10 years, there has been a sharp decrease of both the size of the animal and the size of the horn because of trophy hunting. So that's only in 10 years, and this is a long-lived animal. So there is clearly some effect on human hunting on the evolution of these animals. And the worst part is on elephant poaching, where here there is a single gene which have been identified, which actually make the elephant with or without tusk. And there has been evolution of the frequency of this allele in Sri Lanka as a consequence of trophy hunting. That the elephants are losing the tusk so that they don't get killed. And last thing is the consequence of hunting only males for the evolutionary potential. Here I'm going to go a bit into population genetics, very simple one. And this is for the pheasant. Usually people recommend to kill only males. And so again, if you go on the website, on Google or Wikipedia, they'll tell you that it's enough to have one male for 10 female, one male out of 10 individuals, because one male is enough to fertilize all these females. And this is true. Like if you have a farm, you don't want to have as many cows as female as bulls. So it's fine from a demographic point of view, because especially it's better actually, because only females make babies and the male are quite useless. I mean, in demographic terms, I mean. But now if you have 90 females and 10 males, so the demographic size is 100, but the genetic size can be shown to be 36. And the reason is that this guy has a tremendous reproductive output. Each male is transmitting lots of genes. So all these individuals are related. And that decreases the evolutionary potential. And I'll just give you a few examples. This is just standard simulations, very small, just to illustrate the importance of population size for the evolutionary potential. So here I just simulated 10 different populations through time. And I start from one gene with two variants, two alleles, which is equal frequency, and it's neutral. There's no selection. And you can see, or maybe you can't see, I don't know, after 100 generations, I have I have one population here which had fixed one allele, another population here which has fixed the other allele. You see the trajectory, but there are 8 populations still polymorphic after 100 generations. Whereas with a effective genetic size of 36, which is if you have 10 males and 90 females, only one population is still polymorphic after 100 generations. So this is just to illustrate the power of the population size, what we call genetic drift, to actually lose the loss of polymorphism. And this is something that these people don't think about. And I think it's important to take this into account. And it's important also to maintain polymorphism, if you have a balanced polymorphism. Same thing here. And here you have all 10 populations still polymorphic. There is some things going on. And here, only 7. Same for the response to selection. If you have a favorable allele coming into the population, 100 individuals, you'll get 7 times you get fixation of the good allele. But if you have only 36, it gets fixed only in 3 out of 10 situations. So the conclusion for hunting recommendation is that from a fertility point of view, one male is probably indeed sufficient to fertilize 9 females. From a demographic point of view, it's actually better. As I said, males, and I don't know whether you're familiar with those people working on the evolution of sex, but usually we think males are really just parasites of female. And from a demographic point of view, it's totally true. But from a genetic point of view, it's not true. And having 10 males, 90 females, really like having 18 of each. And that's not good at all. Okay, now I'll turn to the last part. I hope I'm okay with timing. Yeah. And so I hope I've convinced you that at least for manage other species, I think evolutionary biology is important. Did I? And I would like now to turn to humans. And this is not an area I'm working on at all, so I've just been reading. And I just would like to talk about something that actually was done, a work which was done by also Michel Raymond, who did the insecticide mosquito work, who was part of this work 10 years ago, and now he's working on human biology. So any of us basically can switch from one organism to another one, and humans just another one. And social science, in particular, you can ask lots of different questions. Like you can, there's something about addiction, about incest avoidance. Like for instance, there are studies showing that to promote incest avoidance, it's important that the kid stays next to the mother a lot, which is not what people do usually. They usually don't sleep with their kids. And apparently if you don't sleep with your kid, well, you'll get less close relationship, and it's more likely that you can get incest relationship. So there's people thinking along these lines. Evolution of religious belief. There are people trying to ask, the question is, why do religion evolve? Why do most societies actually invent God? Or find it, whatever. And you could see religion in different ways. One is that it actually gives an evolutionary advantage to those religious people because they make more kids and it's a vertical transmission. So religion will evolve at the same time as religious people. You could also see religious as more like a disease that spread horizontally. So, but depending so different religions actually are transmitted in different ways. Some is mostly vertical. And with this religion, you might think they should be associated to a higher fitness of those religious people. But other religions are more contagious. And so those religions, you don't expect them to be so good for the people who carry them. So there's a lot of people thinking about evolutionary religion. And evolutionary psychology is also an emerging field. And so this is Michel Raymond, one of the authors of this paper, the one who did this, also contributed to this mosquito resistance work. And the question he was asking, I don't know how many of you are parents or grandparents, but very often, at least in France, when you go to if I had a baby and I have a father, it's very likely that my mother would tell the father that he really looks like the baby. I don't know how many of you have experienced this, but usually the family-in-law tells the father, the family of the mother tells the father that the baby really looks like him. And so Michel wanted to know whether this was true, whether indeed does the kid looks like the father, or is it unconscious manipulation? It could be also unconscious manipulation by the mother to convince the father that he's the real father, so as to get parental care. So that's the idea. And so what Michel did was to have several replicate of this experiment where he would have either a boy or a girl, here it is, it's a girl, and 3 potential fathers, and he would ask people who don't know them, who is the father? And he would do the same with the mother. So he has a jury, a lot of people, and they say, okay, you have all these pictures, tell me who's the father of this kid. I don't know whether you know the answer. You think you would say he's the father? No, he's the father. Okay, so you can tell there is, of course, his kid was also among the cards, but so you can see that if at random you have one shade, each of them has one chance to be the father. So the null expectation is actually here. That's the red curve, and here it's for boys and girls, and this is the probability of being assigned to the right father as a function of the age of the child. What you can see is that, so the data are, it's a logistic here, it's there and there, but this is the regression. So for the mother, which is here, you can see that the probability of being assigned her own child is about 50 or 55%, well above 30%. So, I mean, she does look like her child, and it's constant through time. Whereas for the girls with the father, a young girl really doesn't look like her father when she's young. You know, it's a bit, I mean, it's 39%. So it's still more than 30%, but not much. But then it increased until the age of 3-4, where the girl really looked like her father more than to the mother, and then it comes back to the same thing. And for the boys, you have a steady increase for both the mother and the father, that the child looks like him or her. So it starts a bit above 30%, 40%, but still, again, you see it's not much they don't look that much to either. The young girl looks like no one, basically, a bit more like her parents than anyone else, but not much. But by the age of 6, she's very much likely to be assigned to those parents. And what they did, so when the mother and the family-in-law tell the father that the child really looks like him, they're not completely lying, because they actually, they either both boys and girls, they do look like a bit like the father. Not much, but a bit. But then, when they tell the baby resembles him more than the mother, which is very often the case, it's really yours. And this is not true. And here what they did was a very, very funny experiment, I thought. They asked the mother to tell whether the baby looks more like her or like the father. So and the mother just does the opposite of the real thing, is that this is how often she attributes the baby to herself. She says, oh, the baby really looks like me more than like the father. And this is when she says it really looks like more to the father. And this is for boys. And this is for girls. And remember, I should go back to it. Remember the data. The boys really look like no, the girls look like no one. Okay, so the girls look like the mother, but not like the father when she's very young. And this is the data for the girl, if I'm correct, and for the boys. For the boys, boys looks like no one when they're baby, but the mother says, oh, it really looks like the father, which is when they look like no one. So they attribute the boys to the father much more than what other people would say. And so this is a kind of manipulation. You can interpret this as a kind of manipulation to really convince the father that he's the father. Okay, so this is the kind of question that people are asking. And so if you're a father, your baby should always look a bit like you, but they should resemble you more than resemble the mother when they are 3-4 years old. So maybe this is a good way of knowing whether this is your child or not. Okay, I'm joking. DNA is much more efficient, of course. So I just would like to finish by evolutionary medicine. And at the beginning of my talk, I said human evolution was very slow for most traits. It's not true for all traits. We know some traits have been evolving very fast, but probably for most traits it's been very slow. And this is evidenced by low genetic divergence between ourselves and other primates, and between different human populations, presumably evolving in very different environments. And the total human population density has been very slow until recently. And so this is just how recent it is, and this is until minus 2000, where very low population size and suddenly big increase. So here probably a lot of adaptive evolution because we had large population size, but lots of people think we have spent most our human history as hunter-gatherer more than under agricultural, and certainly not under industry. And so it's very likely that we're still adapted to the Stone Age, or at least to the Neolithic, and not to today's environment. So there is probably a mismatch between our genes and present-day environment that might explain lots of things. And this was, so the Darwinian medicine initially was actually born in a very founder paper in 1991, so that's 17 years ago, by G.C. Williams, who's been lots of work on the evolution of senescence, and Randolph Ness. And Ness in particular published this book, Why We Get Sick. And think about, we are in the selection thinking. So the idea is not what is the mechanism in terms of medical mechanisms, but the evolutionary reason. Why do we get sick? And they wrote a book with G.C. Williams again. And the reason for being sick was that, as I said, we have a mismatch between our genes and present environment. We're not adapted to the present environment because it's been changing too fast, and we didn't have time to co-evolve. Also because pathogens are living beings, and they also evolve, and they have short generation times and big population size, so probably they adapt faster than we do. So that's one reason. Two reasons. Maybe also because there's constraints to what selection can do. So even if we were given lots of time, we might not be able to react properly because everything is costly. Trade-off, remember I talked about the cost of resistance to insecticide. We probably have the same thing. That's probably why we get old, for instance. And also maybe we don't understand what is the shape, what selection is shaping. It maximizes reproduction and not health. And defense, such as pain and fever, might be useful despite being very unpleasant. And recently in this new journal that I taught, there has been a whole issue on evolutionary medicine, where there is this paper by Ness again and Steve Stearns, where they really try to promote evolutionary medicine. And here this is where they say there are these two ways of thinking of phylogeny and adaptive significance. I don't have time to go through all this, but if some people are interested, I can send them the PDF, the paper of this. But you can look at various traits or various alleles and look and ask for this: what is the origin of this trait, and what is the adaptive significance of this trait? And because of this, we have a whole set of different things we can look at. We can look at what do I want to know? Okay, avoidance of antimicrobial resistance. We can look at evolution of menopause. There is now evolutionary psychiatry, nutrition, and I'll just give you a few examples. This is the example I want to give is jaundice, when the baby gets yellow, because and until recently people thought this was a disease and which should be cured, and in particular they tried to cure it by putting fluorescent light on kids. And because this would burn the eyes, and they realized it was burning the eyes, so they would put something on the eyes of the baby. But recently people have been challenging this idea that jaundice was actually something bad. And in particular, it's been shown that the jaundice was, we knew this was caused by a bilirubin compound, which actually is an antioxidant. And so it's a normal process that babies can get yellow. This will protect them against antioxidants. And there is a disease where people produce lots of bilirubin, and it's been shown that they would actually be more protected against cardiovascular disease. So we are starting to understand by asking this selection thinking, and the reason why people ask about bilirubin, I'm not going to go into chemistry, but it comes from the degradation of hemoglobin, okay? And it produces something which is called biliverdin, which is soluble in water, and which could be excreted immediately. But we bother, every organism bothers to do biliverdin, produce bilirubin instead, which is very difficult to extract. And then it has to go through the liver and in order to get rid of it. And if you don't take a selection thinking, you say, okay, this is just a waste, and there's something wrong because we produce too much, let's get rid of it. But if you start having this selection thinking, you say, okay, wait a minute, why not try to extract this hemoglobin to get rid of it in the biliverdin stage, which is soluble? Why make the trouble of producing this, which is difficult to get rid of? This means something must be useful for something. And indeed, once we looked for something, why would this be useful? We found that it would be useful as an antioxidant, as I said. So this is the kind of selection thinking which I think we should tell medical that they should use. Another example is breast cancer. It's linked to estrogen level. Estrogen level, so the hormonal level, is related to total lifetime ovulations. And total lifetime ovulation is linked to nutrition. And this is to tell me I should stop, I suppose. And nutrition has changed. This was an old paper where of course we don't know what did our ancestor eat, but so people have been, anthropologists have been very useful by being able to go to the hunter-gatherer civilization. And the idea is that this hunter-gatherer civilization actually looked like our ancestor. And of course we know that they would eat, this is contemporary American, so they would eat more meat and less vegetable, and we eat more fat than they would. So we know that the nutrition, we eat much better than our ancestor and then the hunter-gatherer civilization. And the consequence is that if they compare the reproductive variables between this foraging population and the American, and what we find is that the American, as well as most civilized society, the young girls is puber, but the puberty occurs much earlier. At the age of 12.5 instead of 16 years old for this for aging populations. The age at birth is much later than in this population, with the result that there is much shorter time between puberty and the first pregnancy in this population compared to Occidental population. And the result, and also because there's less breastfeeding in our civilization compared to this civilization, they would breastfeed during 3 years on average, rather than here once very, very few. And the development of the breast has been shown to be linked to breastfeeding. And so the result is that in this population, a woman has about 160 lifetime ovulation compared to 450. And because of this, the hormonal level is very different. And this has consequences for breast cancer. And so these people advocate, even suggested maybe we should do hormonal intervention to actually delay puberty in women, and that this would actually decrease breast cancer. So you see the whole suite of traits that people have asked. And so a function, so breast is really because breast cancer has increased, according to him, to these authors, because we are too well fed. This has consequences for obesity, but also for the reproductive cycle, so that we have too many ovulations, and this affects the probability of getting cancer. And so the conclusion is that either we stop eating, or we might want to modify the hormonal cycle. That would be a conclusion of this mismatch. There's also something about iron deficiency. I won't go through it, but it's been shown that iron deficiency, where people think if you're sick and you have not enough iron, people would say, okay, we should give them iron. But in fact, it's been shown that there is sequestration of iron, and that protects this against disease, against the bacteria. And again, it has consequences. Fever, you might ask, what is the adaptive significance of fever? And this is a paper which was published last year in the Archive of Disease in Child. And he says, why is the evidence not affecting the practice of fever management? We now have loads of evidence showing that fever is good. It's unpleasant, but it's helping people to recover from disease, especially children. And still, whenever there is a child which has like 38 or 39 degrees, he's given aspirin or paracetamol to get rid of the fever. And there is no evidence that this is actually delaying the recovery of the disease. And so this is just in this paper that if you look at how many, this is a citation index from medicine, molecular biology, ecology, and evolution. What it says here is that those two disciplines cite each other a lot. Those two cite. Ecology and evolution sometimes cites medical papers, but medical papers never cite ecology and evolution paper. And this was 2007. And so I hope I've convinced you that, yes, evolutionary biology is useful, not only to manage this protected or endangered or game species or alien species, but also to understand human being, to understand our past, to understand also our future. And I think, of course, it asks for a new ethical problem. You might think not all research is feasible. Not all methods are usable, like delaying puberty by this hormonal control or having genetic control of pests. And certainly as we move more into this, we'll have to think about those. But I think it would be really important that evolution is taught earlier at every level, and in particular in medical school. And it's not taught at all in medical school. And I think this is very important. Okay, thank you very much.
Gave several examples of impact on an environment that led to an evolutionary change. One that comes to mind, for instance, is the pike and the perch, where people fished out the perch, I think, and the pikes grew larger. In a situation like that, not specifically that one, but situations like that, how does one know, for instance, that it isn't just an effect on the food supply, that when there are no perch, there's more food for the pike, so they grow bigger. In those kinds of situations, have people done genetic analysis to see that the genome is actually changing as a result of these impacts? I have another question.
No, that's yeah. There has been a special issue again on evolutionary of this journal I was talking about, evolutionary application, where there's a lot of hand waving, saying we can make models, we know that we have changes, but there has been very few genetic analyses actually showing it. And the reason probably, unlike with the horn size, I showed you the big horned sheep, where they have pedigree analysis. So here they can show that there has been genetic changes because they have the follow-up, they have the pedigree of every individual. So they know they have genetic variants. But with the fishes, I think it's more difficult. But people are starting to do it, like Michael Hansen, like people in Norway or Denmark are starting to do really this type of experiment where they can actually demonstrate that there has been a genetic change.
If I may, another question. I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but people sometimes ask me, people who aren't so persuaded or don't want to be so persuaded by evolutionary thinking, sometimes ask me, what's the evidence that there really are changes in evolution during a human lifetime? And now I know what to tell them. I can tell them spider mites. But I know what their next question will be. Well, is that a new species? And I don't know what to answer. So if I were an evolutionary biologist, I'd know what to answer, but since I'm not, I'm asking you.
Yes.
Are there changes that you, for instance, would agree are changes to a new species that have been induced in the course of human lifetime?
I wish I could answer yes. I think the problem is that we are producing more extinctions than new species. And we see extinctions much more often because of our own actions. And it's funny that you asked this question because I was in a creationist conference recently. Unfortunately, it was the honorary dean of the University of Medicine who was organizing this conference, giving the conference. That's why I'm saying this situation is really dramatic. I mean, think about it. Dean of the University of Medicine organizing a creationist conference and showing evolution doesn't work. And I said this. He said, well, evolution goes very slowly. So I talked about my mites. I said, well, in 15th generation, I double survival rate, so I don't think that's very slow. And he said exactly this, but have you actually shown that you produce new species? And evolution is not just producing new species. Evolution is changing phenotypes. And if you look at Darwin natural selection, it's just this descent with modification and adaptation. And he doesn't really care whether you call this new species or new phenotypes or anything. So I guess I would answer to the people who ask questions, I would tell them I don't think this is an important issue, whether we call them this, whether it's a new species or a diversification of any sort. But this being said, yes, we do have evidence for new species, or like in we have in plant-insect interaction, there are some examples where there is new species appearing because of new hosts, new colonization, and they shift to a new host, and then there is some reproductive barrier evolving. That can be very fast, but of course not in humans.
About the same question, what I hear from people who are, let's say, religious people, or people that understand more than I, and they say that till now there have been seen changes within the same species, differences, subspecies, but not from one species, or I'm not sure if it's a species, I don't know the word, like with a donkey and a horse, the next generation doesn't produce, is not fertilized. Is there one evidence at least that it is?
New species again. I mean, this is the same question?
It's about the same question, but there are differences, there are changes, but how strong the jump, how big the leap? Is it within the same species or really do you see really new species? Is it only a subspecies?
How do you define a species?
You are the expert.
Yes, and I'll tell you it depends if you're talking about bacteria, or if you talk about donkeys or plants. For instance, plants are very special. We do have evidence of recent evolution of new species in plants by hybridization. And like if you have two species that produce hybrids, and the hybrids cannot reproduce until there is a doubling of chromosome number, which can happen, and then it makes a new species. And we have examples of recent evolution of plants. I mean, not that you will see one in your garden tomorrow, but again, I don't think this is a very important issue. I think the evolution of this diversification is important, and I think the reason why we should care about evolution is that with our present environment and globalization, and mosquitoes take the plane, and the insecticide resistance I showed you occurring in Montpellier is in the United States. The mosquito do take the plane. So we are actually homogenizing everything. And so I don't expect to see many new species appearing because of this. I think we're going to see more extinction of species than new species appearing, but not because speciation does not occur, but just because we're shrinking the environment, we are homogenizing everything. And it's a very slow process, but we do see lots of insects, as I said, going on new host plants and colonizing new environments. And you might not want to call this new species, but it's a new niche which has been colonized. So to me, it's as important as if it were a new species. It's diversification of the type of environment that a given species occupies. So I don't know why we should concentrate on species, especially given that, we should concentrate on diversification on a tree, for instance, whether we have an enlargement or... I guess I don't know. I think people are trying to concentrate on what they call adaptive speciation or ecological speciation. See whether in one given place, how can we make new species? And you have this famous example of the fishes in Tanganyika, where the fishes recognize themselves by the color, and because the environment has changed, and because of pollution, the water has been turbid, and so the fishes can't recognize themselves anymore, and now they start hybridize between species, because they can't see the color, so they can't tell this is my own species. Would you call them different species? I don't know, and I don't think it matters. The important thing is that we used to have lots of different colors in the lake, and we're converging towards a single color because they all interbreed now.
Should know some algebra.
Well, maybe they probably should actually be taught algebra as well. Like, biology, students in biology, at least I don't know here, but in most Western Europe university, they are taught mathematics. My students at the university, they get mathematics course in mathematics as well.
And biology.
Yes, but this is
studied evolution. That's
and they
part
study
of the biology curriculum.
Yes, but the way I don't think there is much teaching of evolution before they enter university. At least this is at least in France. They hardly know anything about evolution, and the reason why they hardly know anything about evolution is that the people who would teach them evolution used to be at the university at a time where evolution was not taught. So we're trying to change the program, but it's a very slow process. And think about the time, how long we're going to need to have doctors able to teach evolution. And I think the only way is that we have to go to medical school and say, okay, look, it's first to convince doctors that yes, evolution is important, they can learn from us. And second, be willing to go and teach to medical students. And I'm a scientist, and I like to teach to students who might not do research later, but I also like to teach to hope some students will stay and do research. And if I go to medical school, I know none of these students are going to ever be my student. There's no return. So but we have to do it, I think. And as I said, I don't know why doctors are so much creationist and against evolution. I don't know. But many of them are. And that's frightening, I think. I mean, that they want to apply God to health.
Maybe I can add from this discussion of doctors and evolution. Well, you actually show us quite amazing graph that we all know about the exponential growth of humans. And on the other end, you show that ladies reproduce later, and so the birth rate is much slower. Mm-hmm. And on the other end, we got sick a lot, and so the death rate should decline. But still, the human population increased exponentially. And here are the doctors. They are fighting evolution. They prevent medicine to stop the death rate, right?
Yeah, but the maximum longevity, I mean, we die in better health, or we stay in better health for longer, but if you look at the longevity, it hasn't changed. The maximum longevity in the human has not changed much. I mean, it's about the same thing as it was 40 years ago or 50 years ago. And this might have to do with the environment, which is degrading because of pollution. And second, right? Mean longevity has increased. Mean longevity has increased because of health, because we are healthier and we can take care of disease. But we haven't been able to change the maximum longevity. So we die in better health if you want, but we can't expect to die much later, 80 or 90 years old, or not yet. I mean, but I think if you have, in terms of evolution, if I would like to increase maximum longevity, I would encourage people to actually reproduce much later and later and later, because this is the kind of pattern we see in nature, that those populations which are stable and are selected for a later age of maturity actually are those which live longer. There's a trade-off between early reproduction and longevity. So I would manage to have as much selection as we can at younger, or delayed selection, so that we can actually select for genes increasing longevity. I mean, there are ways of thinking about it, at least. I don't know whether this is good or not, but...
I always wonder about the adaptation. For instance, insects have not learned that the lights for them are deadly. They still fly to the light and artificial lights, or they still don't see glass and bounce into the glass.
Yeah, I also wondered about this. My only hypothesis is that you only see those which live near the city, but that most insects don't live in cities, and I would think that outside cities it's actually advantageous. And so it's a kind of like the source sink kind of that they should be selected against if you prevent insects from coming from outside the city. We eat too much, yes. Now, every time I eat too much, I know my ancestor must have been starving to death. Well, thank you very much.